Hello again, Internet. Welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. Our guest tonight is a very, very awesome person and a dear friend of mine, Cora Cervantes, associate producer at MSNBC out in Los Angeles, her native Los Angeles, where she has been doing some remarkable, phenomenal, absolutely top-rate reporting, not just on the COVID vaccine rollout, but specifically on the COVID vaccine rollout in the Latino community and her Latino community in the state of California. So Cora, can you catch us up on some of your reporting and kind of like tell us what is the state of play right now?
Sure. So I started looking at a lot of equity issues in California, and especially with the vaccine rollout. I live here in East Los Angeles, and LA County has been just a hotbed for COVID, but particularly the Latino community here, Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles. And so as I was trying to navigate the vaccine portal for my own family, I realized how inaccessible it was, and just the digital divide that exists that didn't seem to really play a role in how this was rolled out. And I began to think about other people that may not have access. And so the state of California is releasing data. So I was able to look at just the amount of vaccines that were given. And I noticed that even though Latinos are 39% of the population, 16% of the vaccines that were given out went to Latinos. And so
only 16%.
Only 16%. And so here's the thing about that. States across the country decided whether to go with an age-based or a work-based tier system. And the challenge there is that when we look at primarily young brown populations, they're not going to qualify for age. Like here just in LA County, less than 14% of Latinos are over 65. And so you're leaving out a huge chunk of the population. And at the state level, the Latino Legislative Caucus released a report, like 7% of Latinos are over 65. So even if you were to vaccinate all of the Latinos over 65, you'd still be missing a huge chunk of the population. But what got me was I started looking at specific workers. And so UCSF released research that showed that when things shut down here in California, nearly every group saw a decrease in deaths and COVID cases, except for Latinos. And the conclusion was the reason that Latinos weren't seeing a decrease and saw an increase is because we never stopped working. Our communities never stopped picking vegetables. We're at the supermarket, we're cleaning the hospitals. While we do have folks that are doctors and lawyers, a lot of our gente, they're essential workers. And so then I looked at farm workers, and I found that the life expectancy for a farm worker is 49 years old. And so I thought yeah. So it's like, here we are, we have this age-based tier system, and it's excluding Latinos from an age standpoint, from a work standpoint. And so I wanted to understand it better. And so I began to focus specifically on farm workers, because about 90% of farm workers are Latino. So most of the food that we have on our tables is thanks to a Latino. And so, I worked on this piece. First, I wrote a piece for NBC Latino that looked specifically at the portal. The state of California said, hey, if you're a farm worker, you can get the vaccine. But the thing is, if you went to this portal, the state portal that tells you if you're eligible or not, I tried it with every county. It basically told you cannot get the vaccine. You're not eligible. And so, there was a disconnect. I conducted interviews with the California Surgeon General. I reached out to the California Department of Public Health. And so this wasn't a glitch. The My Turn portal was designed only for medical workers, long-term care workers, and people over 65. So even though the state was saying that, farm workers and childcare providers could access the vaccine, their tool that they were using to let people know if they were eligible or not, basically was telling people they weren't.
Was the website rejecting people who were applying basically to get a vaccine? Were they rejecting them based on age? Was it sort of like a zero-sum game where it's like if you were not a certain, so Latinos basically, it sounds like what you're saying is that they're too young to get vaccinated, too essential to stop working, and getting sick in higher numbers than other communities.
Yes, that's what happened. And so, or just the classifications for work were so narrow in scope, where really the dominant filter was age. And so that's troubling if we think about it nationwide. Because if all these states decided to roll it out based on age because it's faster and it is easier to filter, then by choosing an easier path, we've delayed access for vaccines to communities of color. And, you know, not from an advocacy standpoint, but just from a policy making standpoint, you know, you can make the case institutional racism is a denial of resources or the delay of resources to a group from an ethnic or racial standpoint. And so, you know, while we can't say that that's the case, when we look at data and, you know, we see that there's a huge equity problem. And, you know, that's the thing when you go with age instead of work-based. And
has the state replied to any of your inquiries about these restrictions on the website for applying to vaccines? Or what does the state have to say about this so far, the state of California?
So the state of California recognized that there is an equity problem. And they said that the portal would become the state's central hub and that they would have someone else manage it and that this would change over time. And so, you know, my follow-up was, this was almost a month ago. You know, I said, right, but for farm workers, you know, they migrate from field to field. Like right now it's strawberries and lettuce. Lettuce is year round, but strawberry isn't. So there's workers that will come from Northern California down to Southern California to pick. And so because of these routes and the fact that they lived in, you know, small apartments, like there's rooms where like 4 or 5 people are sharing bunk beds, they're at higher risk of engaging with folks that are coming from different places. And right now in LA County, our restrictions are different, say, than, you know, Stanislaus or Kern County. And so the fact that there isn't uniformity in the way that we're handling it makes it so that these workers are at high risk. So time is of the essence, especially when you consider that not only are we dealing with farm workers here in California, but folks that are coming from Arizona, which is a state with very different, you know, standards in place. And so I did ask that, and they said, you know, we're working on it. They said the biggest problem was supply. And I said, well, I understand there's supply, right? But if you have a small amount of something, you have to distribute it with, you know, surgical precision. And so here the choice was, again, age and not work-based, or work-based, but very narrow. And that was the challenge, that it essentially bumped down Latinos in a way that it's a huge gap. I mean, like I said, only 16% of vaccines went to Latinos when Latinos are nearly 40% of the population and make a substantial amount of the essential workforce.
Only 16%?
Only 16% of the vaccines that were given. I was trying to look up the most recent figures, but as of last week, it was still 16%.
16 or 60?
16, 1-6.
Oh, 1-6. Wow, that's terrible. So President Biden has said that by May, they're going to have the inventory of COVID vaccines for every American adult. Do you think that the state of California is going to have the capacity to distribute those equitably? Like, obviously, from what you're describing, it sounds like it's been sort of a rocky rollout in terms of equity in the Latino community, especially. What chance does your California Latino have? Like, what are the odds that a California Latino is going to be vaccinated this summer? Like, when we do have this national capacity, is it going to, I mean, will it be a trickle down situation? And if it is a trickle down situation, will it actually trickle down eventually? Or, you know, do you have your, what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I don't know, you know, that's the thing. Here in California, the process has shifted. So, I mean, we shifted from one tier system to another. Then, you know, the way that it was being rolled out, the role that community clinics were playing versus mobile units versus, you know, county control and appointments. It's been less than ideal. And so, you know, if, you know, the cases, they've said that it's supply. So if supply is the issue, once the supply is here, then there shouldn't be a problem, you know? And so I think that's something to definitely follow up on. I mean, an added challenge is, you know, we have 3 vaccines, right? We have Moderna, we have Pfizer, and we'll have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Each one have a different percentage in terms of like effectiveness. And so, you know, there's pieces that talk about the tier system in handing out these vaccines. Who will get which one, and what does that mean in relation to effectiveness? There's different research out there that points to, you know, all of them. Really, the point is attaining like herd immunity and, you know, things to consider. But I think that's also something to look at. You know, if there's been a process to delay access, what's the quality of, you know, of vaccines that are coming down the pipeline?
Right. Okay, so just a second question along the same vein. Is there anything else that you're working on that you want to tell us about tonight?
Well, right now, really my focus is looking at the workforce and equity issues, especially on the vaccine. My next thing that I'm looking at is the economic impact. I think the human loss that we've incurred just as a country, or, if you want to be specific within the Latino community, is, just terrible, but there's also an economic loss, where Latinos were at the start of 2019. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get back there. So many small businesses that came up in the last 5 years were Latino owned. And so those 5 years are critical for businesses. And we just experienced a year of so much uncertainty. So I really want to look at not only in terms of health, access and quality, economic recovery, in addition to those loans, what other avenues exist or are being created for people to keep their businesses afloat, to keep their homes. There's housing and security issues. So that's the next thing that I'm looking at, in addition to access to quality care and resources. It's that economic recovery.
Okay. Well, that's a shift gears too much, but your beat sounds like one of the more stressful beats, like a beat that would have a lot of anxiety to cover, especially being from the community that your coverage has demonstrated is so marginalized in these essential moments, both economically and in terms of public health. So why journalism? What draws you to the craft of being a journalist and covering Latinos and equity, or not just Latinos, but equity issues more generally in your home state of California?
I mean, why not journalism? I think, I grew up watching, Noticiero 34 Univision or Telemundo, but I didn't really see myself in, English media. And so it took me a while to get there, but I think it's important that we are in these spaces because, the reason why I started looking into this was because I live here in East Los Angeles, because I'm surrounded by people that are getting up every day in the middle of this pandemic and going to work. And so to me, why journalism? Why not? If I'm here, right. The whole point is to, not to romanticize it, but to speak truth to power and to shed light on things like this. Then we need people that come from working class communities, that are immigrant, that are women, that experience, this country differently, because the questions that come out of these spaces are important and we need them answered.
Growing up, you say you didn't see necessarily people like yourself in this role that you've taken on. What changed? Like, what helped you get over that hump? Or what or who?
It was my friend Posi Tang. She's a badass Malaysian journalist. We met when I first moved to the East Coast, and at the time she was a producer at the New York Times, and we take the train from Princeton into Manhattan every day, and she just made me feel like, yeah, if you want to do this, you can do it. So she taught me how to record video with my phone. But the thing that was most impactful was she took me to lunch at the New York Times when I first moved out there. And she took me to the wall where all the Pulitzer, prizes are, where all the photos of all the folks that have won Pulitzer prizes. And she said, look at this wall. And I was like, and she said, it's mostly white men. And she said, we're not really here. And I was like, whoa. I was like, it's true, right? And she said, we should be here, not just in this wall, but across newsrooms. She's like, so don't give up, keep going, because we need to be in these spaces. So really, Poe was essential. My program director at NYU, who I wasn't sure if I was going to go to NYU or not. And she took me out to lunch and she basically said, you have to come to the program and you need to stay in journalism. So yeah, I think it's been a lot of folks. I think, Alberto Mendoza from NHJ has also been, just great for me. Getting that scholarship made the world of difference between me being able to pay my rent and stay in school and, accessing internships. So I would say I've just been fortunate that a lot of people along the way have banked on me. And, I hope that over time I can lift as I climb, and also, just find ways to thank them for giving me all these opportunities.
One of the things that we found when doing the research and development for this show, Meet La Prensa, was the gap or the void, I guess, for discussions with people like us was sort of definitively, there was an abundance of very underrated journalists and other workers generally from the Latinx community and other communities of color and, traditionally marginalized communities. So my question for you would be, who are the underrated news workers now, today? Like, who are the people who should be getting more credit than they are for the amazing work that they're doing? Like you say, too often the wall of Pulitzers is just a bunch of white men, like it was for you the day you visited the New York Times. Who else should be up there for their effort?
Well, someone that I really I admire their work so much, and I'm trying to find something from them actually, is Adolfo Flores over at BuzzFeed. He's a national security reporter. He covers immigration. He was actually one of the first ones that started talking about family separation. He was down at the border and he showed a picture of a dad who had been separated from his child. And this was before major outlets were picking it up. Like, he was there on the ground. And so since then, a lot of people have talked about it, but really, I think just his story as a journalist, his work as a journalist is just something that I admire, and I follow his work closely. I think he's great. And someone else that I like Adriana Gallardo over at ProPublica. I'm all about transparency and accountability and being able to use data to tell stories. And so I appreciate just how tenacious she is in her work. So those are two people that I think, they come from amazing communities. They are good people, and they're here to, to hold people accountable and to humanize issues that sometimes are complex to understand. But given their experience, they're able to do it in a way that is so powerful.
Well, someday I hope somebody asks me the question of who I would pick as the most underrated journalists in America today, because Cora, you would be at the absolute top of the list. The work that you're doing is amazing and, more importantly, essential. I mean, it's as essential as the workers that you cover. So thank you for your efforts. And we can't wait to have you back on again to hear for an update as to the state of Latino vaccine rollouts and other equity issues in the state of California and beyond. So thanks you for coming on.
Congrats on Meet La Prensa.
Oh, we're super excited about it. Thank you so much.